What is up, everybody? Welcome into the Friday episode of Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. It is the preview edition of the show, Bills versus Jets in 2 days down in New Jersey. I cannot wait for this matchup, Brian. It's crazy. This matchup, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't even really a big believer in the whole Aaron Rodgers era when he first got to New York. So maybe I didn't have as much excitement around that first matchup as some did. This feels a little bit different. I think the Jets are actually maybe the second best team in the AFC East. I think this could be a really challenging game on the road. There just seems to be a lot of energy. And this is probably, if you're looking at the rivalries in the division right now, the spiciest of all of them. I'm excited to cover this game.
Yeah, I don't blame you one bit. The Jets have given the Bills some fits over the years. You can go back to Rodgers' first year where Zach Wilson had to come in. They were able to claw their way back in to that game and win it late. You can talk about Tad. So this has been a Jets defense that has gotten up for these games now with Aaron Glenn as head coach. It'll be interesting to see how that unit bounces back after a pretty dreadful performance against the Steelers.
All right, so we're going to get into a couple of storylines at the top here. Let me set up the program. We're going to talk about Ed Oliver obviously being ruled out and what that means for this defense. And then, if the defense struggles, what does the offense have to do and how should they approach beating this Jets defense? We'll get into all of those storylines. Then we'll take a break. I'll send it over to my conversation with Zack Rosenblatt from The Athletic to get a final view from the Jets side. Looks like Sauce Gardner is going to play, but we talked through a couple of different things there as well. We'll come back, some players to watch, some predictions, then we're off to the races. I can't wait to do it. Speaking of off to the races, everybody should be getting in their cars right now and heading over to Tops Friendly Markets to stock up for the weekend. If you're hosting a party, you want to get your game day spread all set up, rush to the Tops Red Zone. And right now, you can win the GOAT, the greatest of all tailgates, in the Tops Red Zone raffle. Shop from over 25 fan favorite brands and get unlimited savings when you purchase brands like Coca-Cola, Heinz, Pepsi, Ritz, Rosina, Tostitos, and so many more. You'll be entered to win the GOAT, an ultimate tailgate package that includes a Samsung outdoor TV, Traeger grill, Oni pizza oven, and so much more. Find out more by visiting topsmarkets.com/redzone. All right, Ryan, let's get into this thing. Ed Oliver has a teammate step on his foot in practice on Wednesday. He's in a walking boot on Thursday, on a scooter rolling around the locker room today. We saw him walking off the practice field in a boot. He has been ruled out, and it appears the Bills are preparing to elevate Zion Logue off of the practice squad. I spoke to Daquan Jones after practice today, and he said, listen, it's going to come down to guys like himself, Joey Bosa, and Greg Rousseau, and then it's an opportunity for Zion Logue. So that's kind of how it's going to look. But for me, when it comes to replacing Ed Oliver, you can't replace Ed Oliver. But I do think that the light shines brightly on rookie second-round draft pick TJ Sanders. He played 16 snaps in the opener. He's going to get a much heftier workload this week against the Jets.
Yeah, you're going to see an uptick there significantly, and it's, like you said, a great opportunity to show what he can do, to show that what they coached up this defense on the past week to correct some of the errors that he is able to do that in his second game, because the Bills obviously left a lot on the table on that side of the ball. So big opportunity there. I am excited to see Zion Logue, believe it or not, from the practice squad. The Bills liked him enough last year to sign him off of Atlanta's practice squad at one point. He spent most of the year on the practice squad with Buffalo after that. I want to see what he looks like in year two. He was good enough to have a draftable grade by another team in this league. Who knows if the Bills had that on him. A whole year in the system. What does he look like now?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think for this matchup in particular, to go out and bring and elevate a guy at 6'6", 320 that you feel or you believe can and maybe do some damage against Breece Hall and Braylon Allen in this running game, because that's going to be the challenge. It's dealing with not only a really good run game with the backs, but then you also have the running threat of Justin Fields. And I think without Ed Oliver, my concern level has ratcheted up to, DEFCON 5 or whatever you want to kind of term it, against this rushing attack, because they're so comfortable leaning into that identity on offense. I mean, at the receiver position, Garrett Wilson, he's about as good as it comes when it comes to the wide receiver position. But outside of him, there's not a lot of threats in the passing game. So this is a team, even last week, the Steelers knew they wanted to run the ball, and they were able to run the ball successfully for a big chunk of that game. So it's going to come down to guys like AJ Epinesa, who, by the way, in the first game against the Jets last year was absolutely outstanding. Should have had 2 sacks. One got taken away off of a weird penalty. Like they said, he had like a second part of the play after he hit the quarterback and he didn't get off of him right away. Whatever the weird officiating call was, he was explosive and electric as a pass rusher, but he's one of the best Bills players at setting the edge and really containing dual threat quarterbacks. So I'm looking at him, Greg Rousseau, and I think Joey Bosa, even in that department, will probably be even better, with a week on task practicing against another mobile quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably learning from the errors of his ways in that first matchup against Lamar Jackson, where he crashed down a few times and gave up some pretty big gains on the ground. So to have back-to-back mobile quarterbacks, that could really benefit Bosa. And obviously, as you mentioned, Rousseau is so good against stopping the run, setting the edge, as is AJ Epinesa.
All right. Thank you so much for watching here on this Friday as we get it kickstarted into week 2, Bills versus Jets. I want to throw it over to the offensive side because I thought it was interesting earlier in this week, sitting down with Joe Brady at One Bills Drive on Monday after his team just scored 41 and they come back in dramatic fashion. And he was really hung up on some of the series where the Bills offense was stalled out a little bit, a couple 3-and-outs there towards the end of the first half. And why do those moments happen? I was critical of him late in the third quarter as it felt like the Bills had to get things going offensively and getting aggressive. And they kind of sat back and had a run play on first down and were letting some clock go. They've been in the lab this week, and it feels like the message talking to Deion Dawkins has been received. Like it wasn't good enough in week 1. They want to be better in week 2. And, they played the Jets a few weeks into the season, so that offensive line was a well-oiled machine. I think in the run game, especially this week, James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, whichever kind of order they run that thing in this week, the Bills got to find a way to run the ball.
100%. And it doesn't get much easier when you have Quinn and Williams in the middle of that defense and some really good players up front for the Jets. But, I think it does get a little bit easier than what Baltimore has. Baltimore has been great against the run. The Bills are trying to run it up the gut multiple times with James Cook. Sometimes you get a few yards, other times absolutely stuffed. Like one of the 3-and-outs that you alluded to, 8 yards on first down and then nothing on second and third. So they'll test the inside. There's no doubt about that. The Bills have a great O-line, but get a little bit more creative in terms of how you're using Cook. You run him on the edges, have some different plans in place. Don't just go with the same status quo from 1 week ago. This is going to be big for them to be able to run the ball because Josh Allen, with the pressure the Jets can have, if you can run the ball successfully, that's going to take some of the pressure off of him in terms of how the Jets might have to, adjust defensively. James Cook can certainly do it, as can Ty Johnson and Ray Davis, who had a great performance against the Jets last year.
So Will McDonald, Quinnen Williams, there's some guys that are dudes on that defensive line for the Jets. But I think that those are matchups that, you go out and you pay, Connor McGovern at center. You go out and spend a second-round draft pick on Osiris Torrance. You pay your tackles on the outside. Like this is one of the strengths of your team. And when you have a strength on your team, when you've invested this much capital, you need that to win out against another team's strength. And so I'm looking at, as the Bills try to really put the pressure on the Jets offense by getting out to a fast start, scoring early, you got to protect Josh Allen. So I'm looking at Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, the interior against Quinnen Williams. Talking to Rosenblatt, and you'll hear from that in a few minutes, the Jets are going to dial up pressure. Aaron Glenn is an aggressive-minded defensive coach. He wants to get the linebackers involved. Sherwood will obviously be somebody that they're sending quite a bit. They'll probably include some of the DBs as well. So I feel like this, to me, is a Bills offensive line game, not just in the run game, but how well they're able to consistently protect Josh Allen in the passing game.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, Allen has some experience against Glenn from his time at Detroit in terms of what to expect. And Detroit had a lot of dudes on that team as well. And Allen and the offense boded pretty well in that game last year that comes to mind. And I'd like to think that Allen obviously will be up for the task. But for the Bills, too, like you said, get off to a fast start, score some points, put the Jets in an awkward spot because for most of that game last week, the Jets were in the lead. It wasn't until that fumble on the kickoff where they've since released Xavier Gibson, that the tide turned in favor of Pittsburgh. So get out to a lead. And then if on the Bills for the other side of the ball, make sure that you're not letting the Jets get into third and comfortable situations, because that's where they were able to get a lot of first downs 1 week ago. Get them in the third and longs, make Justin Fields a pocket passer, and see what you can do.
The offensive line in the opener, I thought for the most part, considering they played 85 snaps, was solid.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like the expectations for this group, it's higher than I feel like the standard that they met in the opener. You know, you look at Osiris Torrance, didn't give up a sack in that game, but he allowed 5 pressures against the Baltimore Ravens, and 3 pressures by Brown, 3 by Dawkins, 3 by Edwards, 2 by McGovern. It was, it felt like the dam was breaking at times throughout that game. I felt like the Bills did a good job, even while that was happening, finding a way to move the ball, finding a way to score points. But against this team, I feel like if you start letting their defensive line control the game a little bit, and they're able to run the ball on the other side without Ed Oliver in the game, that's when I feel like you could potentially run into a situation where you let them play from ahead.
Yeah, they have to be physical in the trenches, both sides of the ball for the Bills, and wasn't good enough last week on the offensive line, even though they had their moments. They were pushed back on some run plays. You mentioned some of the pressures that they let up. They know that they're one of the best units in this league. They're all coming back again. They've gelled cohesively. It's not like there's some new piece to the puzzle. So coming into week 2, they need to take that next step.
So I'm looking at last year's 2 New York Jets games, and Alec Anderson played the most he played all season was 14 snaps against Detroit, which was an Aaron Glenn coach defense. So that's interesting to note. But against the Jets in both matchups, 9 in the first game, 10 in the next game. He only played 3 snaps last week. I'm wondering if Joe Brady will decide to maybe pivot a little bit, go back to that very heavy personnel, not to necessarily take away from the Jackson Hawes snap count, but you can be a little bit creative with how you kind of cycle through the packages. You can have the jumbo, you can run 13, you can run 22 or 12 with Hawes in the game alongside Dawson Knox or Dalton Kincaid. There's so many opportunities. And I also, we're going to get to our players to watch. He's not going to be it, but I think this could be a big time Dalton Kincaid game. If you go back and watch the Steelers, whether it was Jonnu Smith, whether it was Pat Freiermuth, like Aaron Rodgers was making this Jets defense pay at the second and third level with the tight end positions. A lot of it came off of play action. We'll see how much Joe Brady asks Josh Allen to do that. But I think that's an area, like if you're looking at the tight ends in this game, if from a fantasy perspective, at the very least, it could be a big day for all 3 of them.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned, I was going to bring that up. Kincaid, Knox, those are 2 guys I think are going to get a fair share of targets in this matchup. Hawes had 1 last week. I don't anticipate him getting a lot of targets each and every week, but the top 2, absolutely. Josh Allen has full trust in both. And with the success that the Steelers had 1 week ago, why wouldn't the Bills at least try that?
I want everybody to try right now bringing up your Internet Explorer or your Google Chrome or your Safari and hit in Amtrak.com. Go there right now. They offer frequent departures daily from Niagara Falls, Buffalo, all the way to New York City. Stops include Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Schenectady, Albany, Hudson, Poughkeepsie, Rhine Cliff, and so many more. No middle seats, plenty of leg room, free Wi-Fi, and no baggage fees. Kids ride 50% off on Amtrak. It's an experience, a fun and relaxing way to get to your destination. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. You'll hear my conversation with Zack Rosenblatt from The Athletic. We'll get into the Jets side of this matchup. When we come back on the other side, Ryan and I will deliver our players to watch, give you our predictions. Stay tuned for that. All right, everybody. I'm here with Zack Rosenblatt, senior writer for The Athletic, covers the Jets in New York. We've got a big matchup this week, and this isn't the usual Jets. And now I preface that by saying the Jets and the Bills play tight games no matter what, wherever the Jets are at, what they're dealing with the last couple of years. But this Jets team, going back and watching them this week against the Steelers, I mean, I think that the way you phrased it on social media was just like an effective operation is on offense, especially, is so wild to see. Take me into that offense, because I think if you go back to the first game against the Bills last year, Breece Hall really took over at times in that game on the ground. He did it again in the opener. What are you seeing, not just from him in the opener, but this summer in this run game with the Jets?
With Breece Hall specifically, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. He looked better in that game than he even had all summer, frankly. Like, he was hitting the hole hard. He was getting yards after contact. Like he looked like the pre-ACL form that he had as a rookie. And I think this summer it felt like Braylon Allen was outplaying him to a degree in practices. But every year I fall into the trap of like putting too much into the training camp stuff.
Yeah.
Um, be- because ultimately Brees is a great fit for this offense. He's never really been behind an offensive line with the Jets that was as good as this team was in week one. Like they were opening up holes for him. He was hitting them. He was just playing in a way we haven't seen in a while. And if he's like that, then that really opens up some things for this offense. But he was one of the biggest like takeaways from that first game, where if he can play like that along with a couple other specific guys, some obvious ones, then this offense could be pretty good.
I want to ask you about a couple of specific players, but before we get that, we're taping this at 9:30 on Friday. So both of us will go into the locker room today. We'll talk to the coaches. We'll get an update on Sauce Gardner, Ed Oliver, two big injuries that now kind of loom over things. Take me into the Sauce injury and what's going on there.
So we'll find out from Aaron Glenn when he talks, if he gives us an update on what happened there, because he was dealing with, I believe it was a calf thing throughout camp, and then there was a practice where like he came down weird in the end zone, and then they changed it to say, I believe his maybe fibula or something like that. They said, I'm blanking, but it was like a different spot, and I was just like, I think bruised up from that incident. He was fine, and then now it says groin, so it seems to be moving up his leg. But I don't think it's anything that I'm not ready to like say he's not going to play or anything like that. He was limited, but he wasn't out of practice, so I'm guessing they're being cautious. But we'll know more today. If he doesn't practice today, that's a bad sign, obviously.
And obviously, he's one of the best players at his position in the league.
Yeah.
And take me into the corner situation elsewhere, because Brandon Stevens, I mean, watching him against the Bills with the Ravens last year twice, wasn't good. Didn't really look good in week one. How big of a concern is that?
It's a huge concern, because I think the biggest concern I had coming out of week one was the pass defense outside of Sauce Gardner. Like he traveled with DK Metcalf and shut him down when he covered him. In the 3 snaps, he didn't cover him, where the 3 where DK had 70 yards. So, Brandon Stevens had a really rough game. He had a really good summer. Like, you guys obviously saw him against Josh Allen, and Josh Allen just roasted him. But the whole thing with him coming out of Baltimore is he was always in the right place in coverage. He just never turned his head around. And it seemed like that was kind of not fixed, but it seemed like he was on the right path in the summer. Like he was making plays. And then he kind of reverted back to form. He had that. He made some misjudge. He slipped a couple times. There was a play in the fourth quarter where he should have had an interception that would have changed the game, and he dropped it. And he was just like misjudging a lot of coverage. And it wasn't only him. Like the safety struggled. Michael Carter II, who's usually one of the better nickels, didn't have a great game. I don't think it'll be that bad every week, but it was a concerning performance. So like Sauce, his importance is even higher. And you just know Josh Allen's going to be going after Brandon Stevens all day. So that's a real concern I have, and I'm curious to see how they do it. I don't know if Sauce will travel this week necessarily. I think Keon Coleman obviously is on the rise, but I don't know if the Bills receivers are like, there's not like a no doubt number one guy there. So I'm curious how the Jets approach that, because we haven't really seen with this regime how they do it.
Mm-hmm. If you look at this defense, is there one guy that maybe doesn't get the national love, or like people talk about them when a matchup's coming up, that you think Bills fans should know about going into this matchup?
That's a good question, because I feel like all the names on their defense are relatively bigger name, at least in the football community. But someone who's important, I would say, is Jamie and Sherwood, who maybe people didn't know much last year. Maybe they know a little more now because he got a big contract. But CJ Mosley's gone. He's the guy with the green dot. He's the one leading things. He had a really breakout year last year. He came in the NFL as a safety, moved to linebacker. It took him like 4 years to develop, and then he became a really, really good player last year. I wouldn't say he had an amazing game last week, but their linebackers, him and Quincy Williams, I'd say at their best are like one of the best pairings in the NFL. They need those guys to play better in coverage. They're going to send those guys on blitzes. Like this is a team that blitzes now, and those are two crucial pieces of that. So they're important. And defensive line, I mean, honestly, a guy that you guys know pretty well, Harrison Phillips. He came in pretty late in the process here, but they haven't really had a guy like him next to Quinnen Williams that can kind of eat blocks, stop the run, and make life a little easier for Quinnen Williams. So he's a actually pretty important player to this defense, I would say.
What's been the biggest difference this summer like into the regular season with Aaron Glenn at the helm? Like, just, obviously you've been around this team. It's been a little bit chaotic, but what have you noticed in terms of how things are tangibly changing, culture wise or otherwise, with him now running it?
I mean, there's a couple things. I'd say he tries to go away from the noise as opposed to driving towards it, which I think is a problem the Jets have had for a long time. Not even just Saleh, before him, because the ownership group is always chasing headlines. They want to sell tickets. They care about attention. Whereas he wanted to move in silence. So they didn't make any splashy moves this offseason. Justin Fields was the biggest one, and I don't even know if that really qualifies. And then it's all about like the intensity, the discipline, the accountability. Like they're all words you throw around when a new coach comes in, but it was a real problem around here. And you had guys last year. Robert Saleh's whole thing was like he wanted the players to lead themselves, and it doesn't really work when you're losing a lot of games. And there wasn't nobody to look to as like the guy. And you have the Aaron Rodgers of it all, and they would just fall apart at the end of games. It felt like they weren't prepared. They lost like five. I think it was 5 games that they had a lead in the fourth quarter last year, which falls on coaching. They were the most penalized team in the NFL. It was all just mistakes where they're shooting themselves in the foot. They had some of those last week, not as many. But the biggest thing for him is just cleaning up all the excuse making, all the lack of accountability. Like they cut Xavier Gibson this week after he fumbled a kick return, which is something the last staff, they kind of always waited when it was just too long to do stuff like that. So that's the biggest thing. We'll see if it works. A lot of time it sounds good in the beginning, and then if they lose, teams kind of turn on a guy who's a hard ass, so to speak. So I'm curious to see how it goes if they keep losing, because they have a tough stretch here. Bills, Bucks. I mean, the Dolphins are bad, but the Jets are terrible in Miami. Then you have they have the Broncos a couple weeks after that in London, so it's a tough stretch coming up.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the Bills defense that Justin Fields is going to face here, coming off of what happened to them against Lamar. And obviously the comeback quieted a lot of the noise, but had they lost that game probably by double digits as it was trending, I feel like the national story would be how bad this Bills defense is. Another Sean McDermott defense, maybe underperforming. And I think there's going to be a lot of guys in there that are motivated to, play better than that. But if you're looking at this matchup and what you saw in week 1 from the Bills defense, where do you think Justin Fields in this offense, in the passing game specifically, is going to try to attack?
Well, honestly, I think they're going to use the model of the Ravens. I think in a way they're like a poor man's Ravens offense right now. That's kind of, I don't think they have the high end level of talent. Obviously, in Fields is that's why you say poor man's. But, I think they're going to try and run it down their throat as much as they can and build the passing game off the run, which is exactly what they did against the Steelers last week. And it really worked. I mean, Justin Fields exceeded my expectations beyond belief in that week 1, because he did not look like that all summer. Mm-hmm. He was controlled. He was calm. He made good throws. Like they weren't all accurate, but he made the right decisions. And so a lot of it's going to be a lot of play action, a lot of getting the run going. So you can use that to get the defense to try and stack the box. And then you hit Garrett Wilson over the top. Their concerns are rooted in they don't really have much of a threat outside of Garrett in the passing game. Like Brees is a threat. He's probably the number 2 receiver, but in terms of like wide receivers, they don't have anybody. So that's a big concern. And we haven't seen how Fields would handle if a team really gets after him pressure-wise, because the offensive line did really, really well last week. So I'm curious to see what it looks like. I mean, Ed Oliver is obviously a big swing factor in this. If he plays, it doesn't seem like he will, but you would know better than me. But I just think they're gonna stick to their identity and run the ball as much as possible. Their offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand is not a high bar, but he's more creative than Nathaniel Hackett was the last couple of years. So he found creative ways to get guys open, and I'm curious to see how that works against McDermott. The defense struggled obviously last week, but he historically is really good at making adjustments. So I'm curious to see what he kind of throws at Justin Fields this week.
The Jets are like one of the first teams in the AFC East since Allen kind of came to power in 2020 that are really starting to develop their offensive line. And I thought Armin Menbu was sensational. You wrote about him today. I saw, did they know very early on that he was going to be a dude? I mean, he looks like he's going to end up being a top tier right tackle in the league.
So I think they thought he would be good in the run game right away, and he would go through his lumps as a pass blocker. I think they thought there was some development there, and you saw that in the summer. Like he was going against Will McDonald every day. Will McDonald's a unique defensive end. He's long, He's athletic. He's rangy. He has like a spin move that he uses, pretty unique. They played in the joint practices against the Giants, Abdul Carter and Brian Burns, and he struggled against those guys. But I think those were ultimately good tests for him. And he was just much better in the passing game than I think they even expected in that week one. We'll see as they adjust. But I mean, to go against TJ Watt in your first ever game at 21 years old and to keep him from even pressuring the quarterback, like that's pretty crazy to me. So I think he's someone, I mentioned earlier, there's like a couple of guys that like if they play like that, then this team has a higher ceiling. I think it's him, it's Breece Hall, and it's Justin Fields. Like those three guys played better than I think anybody expected. And so, if this is a team that's going to be a high flying offense, if the defense can improve, like this team has a chance.
Great stuff. I cannot wait for this one. It feels like the Jets have all of a sudden kind of, with the question marks around the Patriots and obviously the Dolphins being the Dolphins still, they could hang around and maybe if we see consistency, to your point, maybe be in the mix for a playoff spot late in the season. So it's fun. I like this rivalry. I like even hearing from Deion Dawkins and going back and watching that first one in New York when Dawkins is running off the field yelling with the fans. Like this is what division rivalries are supposed to be like. So it should be a fun game.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Clemens is still here, and Deion Dawkins is not a fan of his, so I'm sure we'll see them shoving each other on Sunday.
Let everybody know what you want them to check out and where they can find you this week.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Zack Blatt. All my stuff is at The Athletic. I have Jets podcast Flight Plan. We had a new episode go up yesterday, and it's wherever you can find all your podcasts. And Joe Buscaglia from The Athletic was on the last pod. So
sweet.
Yeah.
Joe B. He's my guy. All right, man. Thank you so much. I'll see you this weekend.
All right, man. Sounds good.
All right, Ryan, that was my conversation with Zack. Thank you to him. Awesome to give us a little bit of time before we get to this matchup. But now I want to get into the nitty-gritty of who you think are going to be the difference makers in this game. Obviously, on the offensive side, the Bills are going to need Josh Allen to have himself a performance. But if you're looking at the totality of this thing with the storylines we kind of already covered, who do you think is one of the top key players to the game that you're watching?
Yeah, I'm going to go with another Josh, maybe not someone on a lot of fans' radar. I'm going to go Joshua Palmer. Last week, Brandon Stevens was absolutely picked upon by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if Sauce Gardner stays with Keon Coleman, which I don't know if necessarily he will do, I think that opens up a big opportunity for Buffalo's second outside wide receiver. And Joshua Palmer kind of found his groove a little bit, hit his stride late in that game against the Ravens. I think you're going to see a lot of targets his way. And it's going to be up to Palmer to make the most of those situations, win those balls against Brandon Stevens. Stevens is someone that will play up on you. He doesn't turn his head in time. You can draw some penalties, something that Palmer did 1 week ago against the Ravens. And then you can just simply beat him in those one-on-one matchups. So depending on how they utilize Sauce Gardner, I think that whoever is going against Brandon Stevens, if I want to be a little bit more specific, is going to be in line for a potentially big day.
So for me, I'm going to flip it over to the defensive side of the ball, and I'm going to look at Taron Johnson, who he stays on the field against this Jets offense. Like last week, you saw the Bills go heavy with Dorian Williams going to base a little bit more than usual. I think Taron Johnson is going to be on the field if he's healthy. Now, it's kind of like a 1A, 1B situation because if Taron can't go, he's questionable with a quad injury. Then I just shift the focus over to Cam Lewis, who is his top backup. Like both of those guys, in terms of being sound against the run, is going to be such a priority in this game. Of course, I like the fact that the Bills can go nickel against this rushing attack because of the running ability of Justin Fields. And I think Taron is such a willing tackler. He makes things happen behind the line of scrimmage, and he's going to be important. And not only that, the other piece to me that why he's such an important player in this game is when the Jets go spread or they go into 11 personnel, there's times that Garrett Wilson lines up in the slot, and that's going to put you great on great. Taron Johnson, all-pro corner against an all-pro caliber wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. I'm really interested to see how the Bills utilize that matchup. And again, a side conversation off that, we don't know what's going to end up happening at the cornerback position. Tre'Davious White seems like he's really ramping up here this week. Is it going to be Dorian Strong? If Trey's ready to go, is he going to get the call? If he's ready to go and he's active on game day, do the Bills still decide to go with Dorian Strong? A couple of different possible outcomes. I think if he's healthy and he's on the game day active list, he'll probably start. That's just the feeling that I have. What do you think about all that?
We talked a little bit about it. I personally would stay with the young kid and Dorian Strong until maybe he faces some struggles. And then you have the veteran in Trey White that you can bring in. You can rotate them a little bit, but I get the whole talking point of if you want to go with Trey White. Trey White was the starting outside corner for much of this summer before that injury late in the toward the end of the preseason before the roster cut down. So if the Bills go that route, I totally get it based on how the roster was shaking out at that time.
I also went back and looked at the two games, and one of the big differences last season, Jets-Bills, the first game, 23-20, the Bills were able to kind of escape with a win. The second game, they blew them out, 40-14. And what do you think the big difference is, Ryan? We try to go through all the stats, and what do we land on? Turnovers, baby, right? Like that's the big number. The Bills were able to create 3 turnovers in the second game, only 1 in the first game. So that's going to be another one of those key factors. Like, can you force Justin Fields as a thrower? If you're able to neutralize that running game early on, can you force him to try to make unforced errors in the passing game? That's one area where I feel like the Bills can maybe pick on them. And I think Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop are plenty motivated after probably everything they've heard this week to have a bounce back performance.
100%. And maybe it won't be turnovers in this game, Matt, but I am still not a believer that Justin Fields is going to be this pinpoint accurate passer. He proved, he had a great outing against Pittsburgh. I was very impressed watching that entire game. For most of the day, everything was accurate and where it needed to be. But I've also seen enough of Justin Fields' career where there's a lot of ups and downs, and he could be in for an outing where you get him off the field on some 3 and outs, or you force him back a little bit, and then field position could win this. So if it's not actual turnovers, I think the keeping Fields, letting him be a passer, trying to stop him in that regard, forcing punts is going to be what helps the Bills win this game.
I made my prediction for the Buffalo Kickoff Live show 2 days ago or yesterday morning before we learned about the Ed Oliver injury, but I'm sticking with how I picked that. We'll get to it in a second here. Fun announcement though, Ryan. We are changing things up the rest of the season. We are partnering with Buffalo Kickoff Live, WIVB, for a weekly joint episode of the Shout podcast and BKL. So it's going to be Josh Reed, sports director at Channel 4, Carl Jones, sports anchor and reporter over there as well, joining forces with myself and the great and illustrious Ryan Talbot to have a weekly show based around the Bills. It will air simultaneously across all Shout platforms and then on WIVB Plus. We are so excited about this partnership. Josh and Carl, 2 guys that I have so much respect for. I get to work with them every week on BKL, and now we're bringing them into the podcast space.
Yeah, absolutely pumped. Love Josh, love Carl. Looking forward to this new endeavor.
All right, so prediction time. I'm picking the Bills to win 31-21. And I think, like, at first look, you probably think, oh, they go on the road, they dominate, they run away. I think this is going to be a more competitive game than that final score indicates. I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the 24-18 range for a lot of the game. And, maybe that late in the game, the Bills are able to kind of sustain a drive and it looks a little bit different on the final scoreboard. But I think the key to this thing is, I think as good of a running team as the Jets are, I think back to last year and what the Bills were from an identity perspective in their own running game. And I think they're going to find a way to move the ball on the ground with James Cook. Ray Davis, I've gotten a couple questions about him from insiders and folks in my DMs. Like, has Ray Davis lost a little juice? I mean, I don't know. Like, he hasn't played very much. So I against a team that he had a lot of success against last year in the first matchup against the Jets, going for 90 yards on the ground with Cook injured. I think the Bills run the ball. I think to a degree they figure out some of the issues on the defensive side of the ball and end up winning comfortably in what I think is still going to be a competitive game.
Yeah, I have the Bills winning this one 31-17, so pretty close to your score prediction. We always seem to be in the same ballpark. I think that early on, the Jets might be able to hurt the Bills on the ground, keeping them off balance with the 1-2 punch at running back with Justin Fields using his legs, but then they'll settle in as they always do. After a few series, they'll force enough stops where they can get a little bit of a lead late, force a turnover on down, score one more time, and end up winning this game by 2 scores.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode, Ryan. I'm going to give you the final word because we got an announcement that I'm going to close the show with, but you take your final word first.
Yeah, final word. Great opportunity for the Bills to get off to a 1-0 start in the AFC East. which, the division didn't look overly competitive last week with Miami's performance, with the way that the Patriots utilized Drake May, overthrowing him a little bit in that game. But it's going to be important for the Bills to keep stacking wins to try to claim that number 1 seed. And then you have a short week of rest leading up to a Thursday night football game. So huge opportunity for the Bills to get off on the right foot in the AFC East.
All right, so we announced a couple shows ago that we're coming to Atlanta. Ryan and I both are coming to Atlanta, and we want to make sure that if you want to go, you have your ticket to the event. It's going to be at the Whitehall Tavern on Sunday night. That you have to buy tickets, or I think they're going somewhere around $60 per person. But if you're going to be going down to Atlanta for the Bills versus Falcons game, we want you to come out and be a part of our live episode of Shout. Meet and greet. We'll be hanging out with Bills fans. It's going to be an absolutely awesome party. We cannot wait, Ryan.
Yeah, pumped for it. 5 Labatt Blues in that deal, a buffet, really good deal for the price, and then you get to see Matt and I.
That's like the least of the priority list, but we appreciate you making us a part of your weekend. All right, for Ryan, I'm Matt. Headed down to New Jersey tomorrow. We'll bring you coverage from Jets Bills on Sunday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon.